I want to begin this video by showing you the solution for our little challenge from the last video, where I suggested you try to implement the edge physics body of our scene in a way that our birds will stop on top of the ground tiles and not the very bottom of our scene, which kind of looked weird. To achieve this, I will, right before initializing my physics body, define a constant called physics_rect, which will be a new CG_rect instance. It will get a X and Y position, as well as a height and width. For the X position, I will say 0. And for the Y position, I want to change something. Since we do know that the minimum Y position of our scene is 0, because of its anchor point, I want to add the height of our ground tiles to this value. I can easily do that by just saying mapNode.tilesize.height, since it's unnecessary to write 0 plus before that. So we just pass the height of our ground for the Y position. The width can just be the width of our map node by passing mapNode.frame.size.width. And for the height, I will again have to modify it a little bit by subtracting the inset that we've done at the bottom for our tiles. So I'll start with mapNode.frame.size.height and then just subtract mapNode.tilesize.height. This will now give me a rectangle that contains our complete tile map without the bottom row, with our ground tiles. I can then use this rectangle instead of the map node's frame to initialize our physics body. And that is already all that we need to change. Now we want to take a look at how we can get a little game flow going, so that we have a specific order of things happening in our scene, like launching the bird, resetting our camera, and stuff like that. To begin, I will write at the top of my file, above my game scene class, create a new enumeration that will be called round state. This enumeration will get 4 cases to start, which will define 4 different states our game can be in during playing. The first one will be the case ready, and then flying, finished, and animating. Ready will be the state right at the beginning of our game, before we've launched the bird. Flying is obviously the state when our bird is airborne inside of our scene. And finished will be the state when the bird has come to rest on the ground. And finally we have the state animating, which will define the stage of our game where we will animate our camera to go back to our starting point, where we can then hopefully launch our next bird. So let's start adding these different states to our game. And we will of course have to begin by adding a new property to the game scene as a variable called round state, which we will initially set to roundState.ready, so that this is the value that we have when we start the game. We can then use this round state to react differently to touches, depending on which state we are currently in. And to start, we will of course take another look at our touchesBegan method. Since we do not just always want to execute this code that we've written this far, which is important for launching our bird, but we will first want to check if we are in this ready state, so if we actually are able to launch a bird. Therefore, I will add a switch statement in this method, where we will check the current value of round state. I can then add my cases and will begin with the state.ready, which will just get this old code. So let's just cut it and paste it for the case ready, since it's exactly what we want. I will continue with my other cases and .flying, which will get a break statement for now. Next is the case finished, which we will implement together. And we want to reset our camera in this case. This state is set in our game when the bird has come to rest after we've launched it, and we now want to use a tab on the screen to move the camera back with a short animation. But I will begin by setting the round state to .animating to get to the next state and not be able to trigger the following code more than once. Now I want to create an action that should move our camera back, and I will therefore call this constant move camera back action, and it will be nskaction.move to CG point. Let's take a look at where we did position our camera in the beginning, which was done in the add camera method. Here we have set the initial position for our camera to this position. So I now just want to grab this code and copy it so that we can now paste it for the CG point. Because this is the CG point where I want my camera to move to with the action that I just wrote. I can then specify a duration, so how long this animation should take, and I will just pass 2.0 here, so 2 seconds. You can of course use other values if this feels like it's too long for you or your game. But we now want to see if our animation is really happening, and this is why I choose 2 seconds. Now I do get an error here, since we've used the view property as a non-optional, but in this touches began method, we did not yet unwrap it with a guard statement. So at the beginning of our finished case, I will add the guard let view is view statement. And if we do not get the view, I will use a return to abort. Now that our move camera back action is valid, I want to change its timing mode so that we do not get a linear motion but a little more of a dynamic look. Therefore, I'll write move camera back action dot timing mode and set this to dot ease in, ease out, which will accelerate and slow down our action over its duration. We do now obviously run the action on our camera. So let's add GameCamera.runAction. And I want to choose the method with an action and a completion parameter. The action will of course be move camera back action. And for the completion, let's just think about what we need to do here. We have our camera moved back to the start, and therefore we should probably reset a lot of stuff that we've changed when launching the bird. I'll begin by re-enabling our pan recognizer. So let's write self.panRecognizer.isEnabled and set it to true. Later on, we will also add another bird here, but we will need some more stuff to do that. And I'll keep the completion handler as it is for now. We now have to add the last case for the round state enumeration, which is the case animating, in which we will also add a break statement. And we can then delete the default case since the statement is exhaustive. When the state is flying or animating, I will of course not allow an user interaction, which is why we just have these break statements here that won't do anything. This concludes the changes for our touches began method, so that now different things happen depending on which phase of our game we are currently in. So we can either grab a bird to launch it or move our camera back. For this to actually work right, I will obviously also need to change my touches ended method. Right here where we set bird.grabbed and bird.flying. I will add setting our round state property to .flying, so that we have now switched the state to flying, in which we are unable to manipulate the bird or anything else with touches. But how do we get to our state.finished, which we need in order to be able to trigger our camera reset? Let's think about how and when we want to do this. I said that this should happen when our bird has come to rest and isn't moving anymore. So to achieve this, we will now override a method from the SpriteKit update loop. I'll do that right at the bottom of our game scene class. The method I want to override is the did simulate physics method, which gets called anytime the physics simulation for the next frame is done. We use this since we want to actually check a property of the bird's physics body. The property I want to check is called is resting. And this property is true if our bird isn't moving anymore, which is perfect for us since it is exactly what we need. And we don't even have to add it as a complicated custom property, but we can just use it right out of the box. To be able to actually access the physics body, we will begin by adding a God statement, which will hopefully give us a non-optional constant with the body. So I'll write God let physics body is bird.physicsBody, and if this should for some reason return nil, I will just use a return statement to abort the method and not execute anything further. If we do get the physics body though, I can just check if the round state is flying and the physics body is resting by checking if round state is equal to flying and physics body is resting is true. If that is the case, our bird was launched but is now not moving anymore. This is exactly when we want to move our camera back. But we can't just set our game state to finished. We have to take care of something else first. We do now want to remove the constraint that fixes our game camera on the bird, which we can easily do by just calling GameCamera.setConstraints. And this time, just passing self and mapNode.frame. For the node, we will say nil, which will set the constraints array of the camera to just the level edge constraint. Other than that, I now want to remove my bird node from the scene since we don't need it anymore, and I can easily do so by writing bird.remove from parent. That's all, and I can then set my round state to be able to reset our camera. So let's write round state and set it to .finished. And if we now tap again, we will get back to the beginning. If we are then back at the beginning, it would be nice if we could spawn another bird. We do, however, not just want to respawn our old bird, which might even result in an error since we did just remove it from the scene. Instead, we want a fresh new bird each time. And to achieve this, I will change something with our properties. I've set my variable bird here as a fixed red bird. Additionally, I will add a property birds, so plural, and this will just be an array of different bird instances. To start, I will just add 3 birds, hard-coded. Later on, we will certainly do this dynamically, but for testing purposes, this is fine. So let's add a red bird, a blue bird, and finally a yellow bird to this array. I can then go back to my addBird method, which I will change. As of now, we just added our 1 bird we had in our scene. Instead, I will now right at the top, set the first bird from our array as the current bird node, and then remove it from the array. So if we call addBird again, the next bird is added. To be sure we actually have a bird left, I'll start by checking if birds dot is empty, in which case we would have used all of our birds and our level would be finished. For now, I'll just add a print statement that says no more birds, and then add a return to abort the method. Therefore, if I am below this if statement, I can safely assume that there is at least 1 bird left in the array. So I can set my bird property to birds.remove first, which will remove the first bird from the array and set it to my bird property and add it to my scene. This method is already called in the beginning of our game and should spawn the first bird. I do now also want to call it and add another bird as soon as our camera has reset. Therefore, in the touches began method, and in the case finished, where we are moving the camera back, I want to add the call to self.addBird to the completion handler, so that we not just re-enable our panning, but also add the next bird to our scene. This way we can continue the game. We should now be able to launch a bird, wait until it's resting, and then tap to reset our game camera, which should then be animated to the starting point. And as soon as it finishes, we should spawn the next bird. We should also, after we have launched one bird, be able to move through our scene again using our gesture recognizers. So let's run this on a device and take a look if all of it works. And if it does, we can finally add some more elements to our game, like obstacles or blocks, to make it a little more interesting. I can now, just like before, launch my bird. As soon as it comes to rest, I can see that it disappears. If I now tap, our camera moves back to the starting position and a new blue bird is spawned. I can then move my scene again using my gestures with panning and zooming, but I can't actually launch my second bird as of now. So there is a small piece missing in our game flow. To be able to actually launch our bird again, we will need our round state to be .ready to execute the code in our touches began method. I want to do this in my addBird method. So right after we have added our new bird, I want to add this line, setting the round state property to .ready, so that we are now able to also launch our second bird and then the third.